There we go. Okay, so this is the first of 3 webinars where we are going to look into sort of 3 of the most complex parts of coaching on Steplab. And the aim behind these sessions is that we share the kind of methodology and research and thinking that's gone into designing the Steplab observation process. And then between sessions, whether you're watching this recording live or you're watching a re-record, you go away and you give things a go on the platform, and then you come back to another drop-in clinic a bit later and you share with Zach how it's gone, you share successes, give us feedback, and we shape your journey together as a coach on Steplab. Okay, so today then, we are going to dig into setting coaching action steps with Steplab. Just to situate that for you, I'm going to talk you through the coaching cycle on Steplab and how that works, which you will have heard once before at least, I think, but useful to hear it again. So on Steplab, it's a 2-part process, instructional coaching. First of all, an observation where you're in the lesson and you're on your laptop or your device, you're scripting your feedback to your coachee. You then meet them face to face and you deliver that really carefully scripted feedback. So in today's session, we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to look at how you can gather evidence. So how you can look at what's the teacher doing and saying, what are students doing and saying, and then how you can use that evidence to diagnose the right goal or step or series of steps for your coachee to work on across a number of weeks. We're then going to take that diagnosis and think about how you can agree on that step with your coachee. So how, when you feed back to them, you can together in a really collaborative way decide on what you're going to work on. And our aim is that by the end of the session you will have something really specific that you're like interested in, that you're excited about, that you want to go away and dig into, and we're going to get you to share with us a kind of action and a goal that you'll feed back to us again when Zach checks in with you in a few weeks' time. So you might at the end of the session write something like this. I'll let you just take a look at it. So we're really keen for you to end the session having something really concrete that you're going to go away and explore. So let's start off then by digging into the challenge. So why is it difficult to set really good targets or really good steps for our coachees? I'm going to show you some non-examples. And then Zach and Shauna, really interested in your thoughts. Let's chat about this. Why do you think these are non-examples of targets or action steps? If I set these for my coachee, what might the problem be?
I think the top one, you would have a hard time measuring if all students are thinking hard.
100%. Yeah, that's true. So it's almost a bit too broad, like you can't see it. It's not specific enough, right?
The second one, with the second one are we combining perhaps too many things, like ratios, like a category, and so maybe splitting that up into smaller parts, maybe?
Absolutely, yeah. There's to launch cold call effectively in a lesson, there are so many micro steps that you need to take if it's not a routine that's already embedded, right? So we can't just say to a teacher, oh, you need to use cold call. We need to chunk it for them. We need to teach them how to roll out that routine with a class. We need to teach them how to script really effective questions. So yeah, absolutely, Zach. That's like a goal that you might work on for weeks and weeks and weeks, right? Yeah.
And ensure you have your students' attention. It's what you want, but now how you're going to get there.
Bingo, exactly. There's no how. It's not specific enough. Like that teacher probably already knows that they're having a hard time getting students' attention, and it's the coach's job to tell them exactly how to do it, right? And to work together on that. Amazing. Okay, so we've highlighted the problem with some of these steps. And at Steplab, because we work with hundreds of schools, when we find that whenever teachers, like new coaches, write their own action steps, these are the kinds of things that we see, because it's an art, because it's challenging to do. So surprise, surprise, I'm now going to show you some Steplab action steps, which are pre-populated. Have a look at these. Let's imagine that, to speak to Zach's point about the fact that just saying use cold call is a really broad goal, if instead as a coach over a series of weeks I set these 3 steps, why would that be a better approach? I'll let you just look at them. interested in your thoughts whenever you're ready.
The idea that you have to take the time to tell students what you're doing. And then there are observable things or teacher moves that could be made that you would be able to tell whether or not the change was being implemented.
Yeah, amazing. That's such a good word. All of these changes are observable. So as a coach, if I set one of these steps, it would be so easy to go to that teacher's classroom the following week and see really quickly whether that change was embedded because it's observable. Yeah, spot on.
Well, I'm thinking it's also kind of like a curricular approach. Like you're like, okay, like this would be a good kind of first step, and then this would be this is in a logical sequence. Where cold call on its own would be kind of just like a trick, right? It's kind of like
Yeah.
a single technique, kind of
Yeah.
done in isolation. Just do this. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's super easy as teacher educators to forget that teachers need really good curriculum planning that's sequential and builds gradually on prior knowledge, whereas this, it does that, doesn't it? You can see that sense of progression from week to week. Shauna, I'm interested in your point before. I think when we had a look at this one, like ensure you have students' attention before speaking to them, you said it's the goal, but it's not the how. Are you seeing that how here in some of these steps?
I think you are, because you have a way that you're telling the students what change you're going to be making and why we're doing that. And then also there's a specific way that you're going to be using the question and then not just waiting for raised hands. So I think there are pieces that we're telling the students how it's going to go, and then the teacher's able to enact those steps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Welcome, Stephanie, who I think's just joined us. Stephanie, we're digging in today to what makes really effective action steps for a coachee. You've joined at a great point because we're gonna summarize the challenge that we're trying to solve now. So, as we've highlighted, then setting really effective action steps as a coach is tricky, it's difficult, and that's for a number of reasons. So firstly, teaching is complex. There are always like millions of different steps that I could set when I go and visit a teacher's lesson, and it can be really hard to prioritize what to select. As we've touched on, teachers need really effective curriculum planning. So I've got to make sure that I'm not just like jumping around and working on different things, but that my steps build incrementally on each other. Steps also need to be achievable in 1 to 2 weeks. So I can't just say introduce cold call because that's going to take me 6 weeks. It needs to feel really granular so that teachers get that sense of incremental progress. And then all of those things are, of course, what we want to achieve, but as like a new coach or as a really busy coach who's thinking about millions of different things, selecting and writing really effective action steps is really hard. So that's something that at Steplab we've spent almost a decade like iterating our steps, just working on them, tweaking them, improving them, making them better. And the aim of today's session is to do these 3 things. I'll let you just take a look at that slide. So I'm going to share with you some of the methodology and the thinking that's gone into the process. We're going to have a look at how you can select and sequence steps for coaches that you're working with. And then we're going to think as well about when you've got that step in your mind that you've set for your coachee, how you're then going to guide them towards it and make that process feel really collaborative. Zach, anything else that you want to just emphasize before we start digging into some of the theory?
I'm just thinking of all the questions I had, the mistakes I kind of made. Like it's totally okay to like at first I think do some of the things I did, but like one was like I'd select a pretty low leverage step, and then I would move on to something else, kind of jumping randomly between steps, between the strands, you know. And I love how you showed the image with the sequential kind of curricular approach, because it's just taking what we know about lesson planning almost, right? And learning objectives and applying it to coaching. I think it's going to be great. So Rachel, keep going, keep plugging away.
Okay.
And Stephanie, welcome.
Yeah, welcome, Stephanie. And
3
Stephanie,
steps be in the
yeah,
1
go
to
on.
2 weeks that you mentioned.
So it depends how often you're coaching. So for me, like if I was coaching somebody once a week, I would like do this in week one, and then it depends. Like if I go back the next lesson and it's clear that students are becoming more confident with that routine, then we'd move on and we'd set that next step. Like I think you can do this in 3 weeks, but of course it depends
Okay.
on your coachee and how quickly they pick up on things. Please
Thank you.
do interject and ask questions like that because we want this to be a conversation. Okay, cool. So as Zach said, then we're going to dig into some of those aims and kind of think about common pitfalls. We're going to think about some of the theory, and I'm going to share with you like how we've designed the Steplab observation performer to make this process really simple. So just to situate this for you, Zach, can I just check, can you see Steplab now?
I can see some trees, some gorgeous
Oh,
trees,
there
but
we
not.
go. This is good that I checked that. There we go. Hopefully you can now see that. Okay, so just to situate this for you then, when you go and coach somebody on Steplab, we click coach, and the idea is that you're doing all of the planning there and then in the lesson. So I'm coaching Alex right now. I'm coaching him for the first time. So I click observe, and then I've got my laptop, my tablet, my device with me. And then Steplab's prompting me to do a few different things. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to capture observation notes. So what we mean by that is concrete evidence about learning that's happening. So I'm thinking, what are students doing? What are they saying? What are they writing? What are they thinking? What's the teacher saying? What's the teacher displaying? What are the resources like? And I'm trying to capture really concrete evidence. And normally I'm going to write notes in that box. I might also supercharge that by taking photos of students' work or taking a video. So I'm looking at capturing really concrete evidence. I'm then going to want to script some praise. We're not going to spend loads of time on that today because that's much more straightforward. Instead, we're going to focus on how we go about selecting a next step and then planning the questions that we're going to use with the teacher to agree on that next step. So that's the kind of what we're looking at today, and that's just to situate you on Steplab before we then start actually digging into some of the theory. So we're going to start then with a non-example again. So if we've said then that when I go and I gather evidence and I'm populating this box, concrete evidence about learning, or I'm taking a video, why might it be problematic for me to make notes in this box that look like this? Let's hear some ideas. Why might this be problematic?
Their judgments.
100%. Yeah. Take that further, Shauna. Why is that an issue, that they're judgments?
It would be more of an opinion than a subjective to say this number of students were displaying this behavior. So you could
Yeah.
say the same thing, but without the positive or negative, just it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not this idea of gathering like objective evidence. It doesn't feel very scientific, does it? It doesn't feel very truth seeking. It feels like, oh, I've just got an opinion. Yeah, nice. Stephanie, anything else you want to pick out?
Sorry, I'm in a hallway, so it's hard for me to.
Oh, that's okay. No worries.
um, Similar. That's the all four seem to be judging the teacher rather than providing like quantitative data for them.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That quantitative data would be way more useful. Great. Okay. So a better example, this is the kind of thing that we would often write on the Steplab team when we're coaching people. So whenever you're ready, quick thoughts, what makes that better?
The scripting allows you to have a conversation
Mm-hmm.
or to ask the teacher if they would say something different or make any
Nice.
changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think having like one of the most powerful things is as a coach is having really specific examples of things that teachers have said and things that students have said, because it just suddenly makes it really rooted in evidence, doesn't it, and what's actually happened. Nice. Anything else we want to highlight?
I'm just thinking practically, right? You may not meet with this teacher immediately, and you're just gonna forget what happened. I mean, so
Yeah.
honestly, like if the other
Yeah.
one, it's sort of these general, they didn't do this and didn't do that, and now and now you come back and you meet with them, and you're like, what did I
Yeah.
actually observe? Where this is actually more of a picture of what happened in the lesson.
100%. And also, even if you meet your coach 24 hours later as a teacher, you might have taught 8 other lessons since then, right? And it's going to be hard for you to remember exactly what was said. So if your coach is there and they're like, well, you said this, and then another student said this, that becomes a really helpful prompt, doesn't it, to actually dig into what specifically happened in the lesson.
Is
Nice.
video preferred over the scripting? Is there one
Um,
considered better?
So I think it really depends on I'm interested in Zach's take too. I think it depends on your relationship with your coachee. So certainly for me, when I was first introducing coaching in schools, lots of teachers would feel like quite self-conscious about the idea of videoing. And so I would take this approach to begin with, and then gradually start to introduce videoing. Certainly when I was coaching to begin with, I would find it hard to like record this really quickly, because you're like, what do I look at? Am I looking at the right thing? So the way I introduced it to my coachee was saying, it's going to help me. I'm going to watch it back and it will help me to gather the evidence that I need. Yeah, that would be my thinking. Zach, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was at a school district that with video was really important, but we didn't have a way to organize all the video, so it was really chaotic, the video part. But in that context, I would bring my tripod and set it up, and we're like, I'm not filming, I'm getting the kids ready, and we would kind of over several weeks of scripting, transition to video after the teacher was comfortable, you know.
It can also be really powerful to watch the video back with the teacher. Like there's evidence that suggests that it helps develop their like situation awareness. So it teaches them what they should be looking out for. If you watch the video back, that can be quite powerful.
We've also talked about even if the teacher uses their own device to record themselves, so then I don't have to see it if until they get comfortable with us using it.
Yeah. And you can do that on Steplab. You can just record yourself anytime you like, and you can choose not to share it with your coach if you don't want to. Yeah, amazing. Okay, great. So just to pinpoint the kind of gathering of concrete evidence, then these are the key things that we're looking for. So Shauna and Stephanie, you both talked about that idea of like quantitative data, and head counts can be really powerful there. Here we focused on what's the teacher saying and what the students saying or doing. So it's about moving away from those objective, opinionated statements and instead gathering things that are really concrete. So I'm on Steplab. I've populated that first box. I've gathered my evidence. The next thing that I need to do is diagnose the right goal and the right steps for us to work on together over a series of weeks. So we can think of this as a sort of 4-part process. So first of all, I gather that concrete evidence. We've done that already. Then I'm going to start to form some hypotheses about the learning problem. So what do I think is the highest leverage problem that we could be solving together? And then I might kind of test out that hypothesis, perhaps in the lesson. I'm watching, I'm looking for some more evidence. When I'm sure I've got the right one, I'm going to start to identify a teaching goal that we can work on together for a number of weeks to address that learning problem. And then finally, I need to suggest a step that's going to help to begin to achieve that teaching goal. So just to show you what this might look like, I'm in a lesson. We've looked at this lesson evidence, but I've quite painfully watched a teacher do that classic thing that teachers do if they don't know much about direct instruction and say, oh, we've got a new word, alliance. Who can tell me, what does the word alliance mean? Surprise, surprise. The students don't know what it means. And so they guess, and then they hear all sorts of incorrect answers like, oh, is it when troops fight like lions? Or is it when people stand in a line? And then the primacy effect means that the first thing that students hear, they've remembered rather than the teacher's correct definition. And then surprise, surprise, in student books at the end, we start to see them writing down examples that seem incorrect correct. So I've gathered lots of evidence. I've perhaps photographed students' work. I've written notes about what the teacher said and what students have said. And then I've come up with some hypotheses. So my first one is that inaccurate approach to explanations led to students being really confused. And so perhaps I'm wondering, do we need the teacher to work on optimizing communication? So beginning with really clear explanations first. I'm also thinking, is it a bit of a problem with the teacher perhaps not gathering enough feedback? Like, should the teacher have picked up before the students got to independent practice and writing in their books that they had misconceptions? Do I need to work on that? So I've got two kinds of hypotheses about the goal that I might work on with this teacher over the coming weeks. So my next job then is to decide, well, what's the fundamental learning problem and what's going to be the goal that we're going to work on and what's going to be the first step. That's tricky, and there's some difficult decision making involved there. So what we've done at Steplab is we have stolen Dan Willingham's simple model of memory, and we've turned it into a simple model of learning that coaches can use to help them to diagnose the highest leverage thing to work on. So I'm just going to talk you through how this works because it's some methodology that underpins the design of Steplab. So we know that when we have students, this is a student, the thing that is challenging is that the environment is busy, it's complex, and one of our main roles as a teacher is to reduce environmental distraction and to focus students' attention on the right things. So when I go to visit and observe a lesson as a coach, the first thing that I'm thinking is, has the teacher got the students' attention? Are they securing attention? Are they focusing? Are they supporting students to focus their attention on the right things? And if that isn't in place, that's always going to be the first thing I'll work on: behavior, routines. From there, I know that when the teacher is successfully supporting students to focus their attention on the key ideas, it's beginning to enter their working memory, hopefully, but that's only going to work if the teacher has optimized communication. So if the teacher is not presenting ideas in a really clear and manageable way for students to understand, if the teacher is allowing students to hear really confusing definitions of the word alliance, then that's going to be a problem. Or if it's too overloading and there's too much information, it's just going to get forgotten. So that's the next thing I'm thinking about: optimizing communication. From there, I know that if I want students to remember things long term, if I want information to move from the working memory into the long-term memory, I've got to make sure, because memory is the residue of thought, that my students are thinking hard. So the next thing, the third thing that I'm thinking about, if attention's secure, if communication is optimized, is the teacher supporting students to think hard? When I know that that's happening, I also know that students come to our lessons with such varied background knowledge and really different prior learning. And for that reason, it's almost impossible to teach a lesson without a student forming some kind of misconception. So I need to be actively gathering and giving feedback. So I'm checking, when all of these three things are in place, is the teacher assessing student learning and are they responding appropriately? And then finally, if that's happening, I know that learning is not just a single event, it's not just performance, but we want it to be happening over a series of weeks and months. So I've got to make sure, is the teacher consolidating that learning and supporting students to repeatedly retrieve things from long-term into working memory? And that's the final thing that I'm going to work on. So that is just a kind of overview of some of the thinking at Steplab that we've done on how coaches should decide what to work on first. So to go back to those hypotheses that I was thinking about, do I work first of all on optimizing communication and making sure that students hear really clear, accurate explanations? Or do I work on gathering and giving feedback? Well, I can use this model to help me decide, because I can see that actually there is literally no point working on supporting a teacher to gather and give feedback if communication hasn't been optimized. So if explanations aren't clear, so it's definitely going to be here where I start with my coachee. thoughts on that? Zach, anything else that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, right. It's applying, because in coaching, it's just really nebulous sometimes. How do you decide, right? You're just sort of picking things at random, right? But with this, we're operationalizing it. We're creating a workflow that you can use as guidelines, as like a heuristic whenever you're in the classroom. So in this case, right, giving feedback on something that is it's an embedded misconception. It's better to prevent the misconception than try to catch it and put out fires afterwards. So do the thing that kind of precedes it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Locally, they use a lot of cognitive coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, usually the teacher's the one identifying the goal. Does this work better?
So that's a really interesting question. Like for me, when I was coaching, I actually used to have this with me all the time, and I would often the teacher and I would use it in discussion together, and that was quite powerful. We'll dig in the next part of the session into how we go about agreeing that golden step with the teacher, because it depends on their level of expertise, essentially. That's our kind of approach. Cool. Any other comments or questions on this before we move on? Nice. Okay, so hopefully, if you've started to play around with Steplab, you might have noticed this. If not, I'm going to draw your attention to it. So on Steplab, when I click to select the step for my coachee, it brings up these 5 questions. So these 5 learning problems. So first of all, secure attention, then optimize communication, then drive thought. So we've deliberately designed our diagnosis picker to follow this methodology. So when I'm thinking about this teacher that I'm working with, behavior was pretty good. She definitely secured their attention. She was doing her best to focus their attention on the right thing. But the problem was optimizing communication. And then from there, when I click into that learning problem, I can now start to identify a goal that we're going to work on together. So I don't think it's necessarily an issue with her planning. I think it's actually about the clarity of explanations. She needs to give a clear explanation first before we hear from students. So I'm going to decide that that's the goal that we're going to work on together. And then from there, within each goal, I'll normally have about 12 steps I can choose from. I might start off with her on scripting explanations and making sure that they're really clear. Then a few weeks later, I might do a little bit of work on keeping that teacher talk really lean, and then perhaps limiting content. So those are just some ideas I have about what we're going to work on first. Probably I would be selecting this one to begin with. So interested in your thoughts here then. So maybe just take a second to kind of summarize what you've taken from that. Like, what are the steps that you're going to take using Steplab, from gathering lesson evidence to deciding on a goal to deciding on a step? And have you got questions at this point? So take 30 seconds to have a think, and then we'll hear from each of you.
And so, Stephanie, you work with John
Yeah.
Regino, right? That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So are you part of the next wave of the pilot, or are you part of the initial pilot there that's going on?
I think I'm not sure. I know that they're doing that 2 of the buildings. I'm one of the coaches, so I'm thinking that he's going to introduce us into it quickly. He's already had us play around with it a little bit. I really like that you can kind of pinpoint, we're new to coaching, so just even that, like, where to begin, or like start with, the like the attention first and then continue down. That's just so helpful. And then the suggestions afterwards are really helpful too, especially when you're new to coaching, newish to coaching.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the hardest parts, 100%. I'm glad that seems helpful.
I think with like what I wrote down on my stop and jot relates to what you said, was like, I when you get started, Stephanie, like don't I don't think you're not going to have to hold all of these things in mind that we just said, because you're going to see those those 5 strands coming from the working memory model in the platform, right? And so you're like, oh yeah, that's right, here they are again. Knowing the graphic or having it printed out and memorizing it essentially will help, but like it's here already. And
Yeah.
then as you click in, you're like, oh, here's a menu of it's, you don't have to make up the menu, right? It's all
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be so helpful.
Yeah, it's
Especially,
really
I feel like we're kind of surface level coaching right now. So really digging in, this is going to be a game changer for us.
amazing. Oh, good. That's really good to hear. Cool. Okay. So the next thing we're going to think about then, let's imagine that we've decided on that step. We've decided that we're going to work with that teacher on scripting really clear explanations and making sure that those are the first things that students hear. The next thing that we need to do is work on agreeing that step. So same routine, I'm going to give you a non-example. So imagine I meet that teacher that I'm coaching, and this is what I say to them about their next step. What might be problematic about this approach?
Think when you say like, I think they were confused, there's no evidence there that they were confused. If you had the example of when you were writing down like the actual time and then what the students were saying, that would definitely provide more input for the teacher, because she could say like, nope, they weren't confused, they were fine. Kind of deal.
100%, 100, and it's like it's so common that if you start off by saying, "I think students were confused," teachers are like, "No, they weren't. They know that word already. I taught it to them last week." And then your coaching conversation has got off to a really difficult start where you've begun with conflict. So yeah, I 100% agree with you, Stephanie. Whereas if instead you're like, "Talk to me about your explanation of the word alliance. Talk to me about student understanding of the word alliance. Like, what did you notice?" That's much less confrontational, and then you've got your evidence to refer to if you need it. Nice. Anything else we want to pick out that's problematic?
I guess I
So,
get you're gonna go ahead, Stephanie. Sorry.
sorry. Sometimes I feel like it's good to have the teacher also choose the goal, like form it together, because if they don't see that as a need, then it's not going
Yeah,
to be something that they truly work on. So
yeah,
instead of saying,
absolutely.
I choose for you, you could say, like, let's think about what your goal could be.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Zach, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I think the importance is agreeing, right? And we talk about a lot like that we're neither directive nor facilitative, but we take a responsive coaching model. And I think you're going to get into this right now. So like that's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Okay, cool. So I've written for you what I hope is a better example. So, and it models this, it begins to model this idea of responsiveness. So take a look at this, and then as soon as you're ready, what makes it a better approach?
Think having the teacher pull out the answer and how the students were doing is definitely key, because if they're not even realizing that it was an issue and the students weren't understanding it, they're not going to. So in this one, it seems like the teacher's kind of realizing that they weren't all on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to like foreground what you said a bit more, the emphasis is very much finding out what the teacher knows and thinks and believes already. So it's responsive. So this idea here, like, can you talk me through the moment in the lesson when you taught the word alliance? Straight away, that helps the teacher to find out, well, what does the coachee remember? What were they paying attention to? And if that coachee is really expert, they might say something like, oh, do you know what? I really fluffed that. I don't know. I just went into autopilot and I asked the students to guess the meaning of the word. And I know, I've just read Zach's book, just tell them, I know that's a problem. And I should have actually given them a really clear explanation myself. Then straight away as a coach, you know that, okay, this is a teacher who actually you could work quite collaboratively together on identifying the next step. Whereas if you get a teacher that says, oh yeah, I think it went pretty well, you know, they were all really focused, they were listening, I was really pleased that students put their hand up and they had a guess and they gave it a try, and you know, they were pretty close, they had a good guess. Then you're like, okay, I'm working with a novice here when it comes to vocabulary teaching. They don't know very much about the science behind how you do it well. So instead, I'm going to be ready to say things like, well, I noticed that students wrote things in their books like, let's have a look together at this photo. An alliance is when you line up in a line. And if we think back, actually, Johnny said that when he put his hand up, didn't he? So tell me about that. What impact did hearing Johnny's incorrect answer first have on student learning? So you're being really responsive. You're really deliberately beginning with a question that goes, tell me about the moment when. And if the coachee can tell you really clearly about that moment, then you can just move on and say, what impact did this have on student learning? What impact did this have on students' knowledge? And again, if the teacher says, oh, it's probably the primacy effect in action, isn't it? They remembered the first thing that they heard, then you don't need to tell them that. But if they're like, oh, I'm not sure, actually, I don't know, then you're ready with some of the theory and you can chat to them about it. And then finally, just like you said, Stephanie, that idea of how can we address this next lesson? When you've together built this shared understanding that hearing those incorrect, imprecise student definitions first was a problem, you've begun to close gaps in the teacher's knowledge, they might then already be forming their own idea. Like you've led them towards the step and they might be saying, okay, I should start with a really clear teacher explanation of a new word every time, in which case your only job as a coach is just to really tighten up that step and agree exactly what it means. But if not, you're ready to say, are you happy for me to suggest a step? So it feels collaborative and responsive. Thoughts on that as an approach? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's beneficial for sure.
Nice.
We always say that some teachers are just unaware of what, you know, they're missing. So
exactly.
Bringing that to light and bringing that focus to them is definitely helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
By pointing out one thing and seeing if they realize it or not, and then you use your best judgment on how to approach it.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly it. Oh, I think we've lost Zach momentarily. Hopefully he'll reappear. Okay, cool. So, and then just to sort of really foreground that, I'll let you just have a look at this quotation, which I really like. So this is really interesting because I think if as a coachee you feel like your coach has like got an agenda or they're really opinionated and they're just like, oh, that coach is obsessed with direct instruction, so that's the only feedback they're ever going to give me, then you're going to be a lot less inclined to take on their advice. Whereas if you genuinely believe that the whole time they're trying to gather objective evidence, they're being really scientific, they're mainly interested in the truth about how much students are learning and how we can improve it, then they're going to feel way more trust and way more confidence in their coach. So that idea that you're interested in accuracy, I think, is really important. And it comes back to what you were saying at the beginning, Stephanie, about that gathering that really specific quantitative data when you're gathering lesson evidence. So we have basically what I've done here is given you a whole sort of background and lots of theory that highlights the sort of agonizing and deep thinking that have gone into the design of just 4 really simple sentence stems on Steplab. So we've spent forever thinking about how we can condense coaching responsively like that into just a few prompts. So on Steplab, when you've selected your step, you then get prompted with these stems, which hopefully you'll recognize. So tell me about the moment when. I noticed that 3 students wrote imprecise definitions of the word alliance in their book. What impact did this have on student learning or student understanding? And then finally, how could we begin to solve that problem, or what could we do differently next lesson? So hopefully now on Steplab, when you see these prompts, you'll understand the agonizing, the careful thinking, the research that's gone into them, and that's going to help you to think about how you might use them with your coachee. So Zach, we lost you for a sec. I think internet.
Dude, it was crazy. No, I heard a huge noise, like an explosion just now. I swear
Oh,
on my life, and all my power went out.
oh
And then I'm
no.
now on 5G on this meeting. I swear I have no clue what is happening. But
I wonder
anyway,
if there was
continue.
a generator or like
Yeah.
the
We have some it's storming right now, but
Is it still
whatever.
me? Okay. That was going to be my next question. Well, bad weather. Okay. um, well, Stephanie, because we lost Zach for a moment, do you want to just sort of summarize for Zach like what you've taken from that? What's the significance of this idea of like coaching responsively and moving from I tell me about to I noticed that to what impacted to how could we? What are your thoughts?
or the coachee is observing themselves, and then how to go towards your next instruction. If they're aware of it, then you can move on to this is what I noticed. If they're unaware, you might have to pivot a little. You'll still tell them what you noticed, but it might just be a little bit of a different conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So the key thing is that to coach responsively, you're going to plan a prompt for each of these things. So you're going to plan, tell me about the moment when you taught the word alliance. And then you're going to have ready, I noticed that 2 students gave you imprecise definitions of the word alliance when you asked them to guess. Those definitions were this. I noticed that 3 students wrote very similar imprecise definitions in their books during independent practice later. You might not need to share that. I noticed that because like you've said, Stephanie, the teacher themselves might share that, but you're ready and you're ready to be responsive to what they know already. And then finally, what impacted, they might already fully understand why it was a problem. If they do, great, you just agree and move on. If they don't, you're perhaps ready with a little bit of cognitive science or the theory of learning or something to explain to them why that caused a learning problem. And then finally, when you move on to how can we solve this challenge, what might be your next step, you want to prompt the teacher to find out if they've got existing ideas. If they have, and it's a really good step that's going to help to solve that problem, then you agree on it. If not, you make the suggestion, but crucially, it's all about agreeing on step and making sure that that teacher is really confident and happy. Zach, anything else that you want to just foreground there about this process, like, or your reflections from coaching people and using these stems?
Oh, it's like if you situate yourself in actually doing it, you are sitting there in the classroom. Like this isn't something you need to go to your office and spend a ton of time trying to figure out, right? You're there, you do it right then and there. And then this is going to populate your script that you're going to use when you talk to them. So this doesn't exist in a different space. You're creating as you type this kind of conversational, the art of conversation is being developed so that you're ready when you meet with them. It's super cool.
Yeah. And it means because like I used to find when I was coaching, when I was like stressed or overloaded, like that's when you fall back on habits. So sometimes I would accidentally say things like, how do you think your lesson went today? And then I'd be like, oh no, why did I say that? Because now we're going to start off with a disagreement. But if I had Steplab in front of me and it was all scripted, then I didn't do that. I straight away would say, tell me about the moment when, and then the conversation would come out right. And it would feel like that art of conversation, like Zach's just said. Okay, cool. Well, we are coming towards the end then of this first session. So just to sort of recap, the things that we've talked about then, hopefully you've understood the methodology behind the design of some really, really sort of deliberate decisions. So how we've taken that memory model and turned it into 5 strands and learning problems that can help you to diagnose the highest leverage goal to work on. How we've then turned that into granular steps that you can use with a coachee across a week, every 2 weeks, to give them that real sense of incremental and gradual progress and really good curriculum planning as a teacher as well. And then finally, we've thought about how when you as a coach have got a goal and a step in mind, you can go through that really careful process of agreeing on a step by being ready with really carefully scripted questions and being really responsive to your coachee's knowledge. So in terms of kind of next steps that we would suggest, in a second, I'm going to show you on the site where you can find our coaching skills builder modules if you want to go away and just do a little bit more thinking about this. And what we would really love is for before our next session on the 14th of January, you to go away and just have a play with the process. So go away and observe somebody on Steplab, go through that process of gathering evidence, diagnosing a learning problem, selecting a goal, selecting a step, and then scripting those agree on step prompts. And then it would be fab if you come back to that session and we'll hear from you. We'll see some of your examples, we'll hear what's been going well, and unpick it all together. Zach, anything else you want to highlight there?
Yeah, don't stress too much about it, right? It's almost the holidays, right? For me, that means Christmas. But you have a couple days to kind of try something out and maybe pick someone who's just ready for this and has been asking for this and do it with them and tell them this is for me, right? I'm learning, like, come join me in this, and I think it will be fun.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's such a nice way of highlighting it with the new coachee. Like, we're giving this a go. Can I try it out with you? I want to know how it feels for you. That's really powerful. Stephanie, we really, in the last few minutes, really keen to just hear if you've got any other questions. And then what we would love is for you just to share with, I know we've sort of bombarded you with advice slightly today, but for you to just like come up maybe with like one thing you're really interested in or that you're going to do between now and the start of January, after you've had a proper holiday and rest, obviously. So you might tell us like, I'm really interested in the goals and the steps, and I'm going to go and play with them. You might tell us about who you're going to have a go at coaching. Tell us your thoughts.
I really am excited to look into the goals and the steps, even just to build my toolkit of coaching.
Yeah.
I think looking through them and then being able to pull from there too will be great. I do have a few teacher friends in mind who I do tend to try things out with a little bit, who they feel comfortable with me and I feel comfortable with them in that, being vulnerable when learning something new. So
Amazing.
like Zach said, the holidays are coming up, so it is kind of chaotic at each of the schools. So I'm hoping that one of the teachers will allow me to do that before January 14th.
Yeah, nice. Amazing. That's great. And even before January 14th, if you just have time to like have a play around with the goals and steps, that's great too. Okay, cool. So final thing, just to have a look at then is, can you see Steplab again now?
Yeah.
Just checking. Yeah, perfect. So just to show you where you might go to just like dig into some of the theory in a bit more detail if you want to. So if you head to your library page just here, and then you go Steplab courses, you can see something called the Coaching Skills Builder. And if you just click open here, there are just like bite-sized mini modules that you can use to explore in a bit more detail some of the theory. So like if you want to do some follow-up from today's session, what is an action step? And then these modules on diagnosis would be really great. Today we glossed over how to write praise. So that might be a really good one to look at. And then in upcoming sessions, we're going to look together at modeling and we're going to look at rehearsal. So no need to look at those yet. But yeah, each one's designed to take like 10, 15 minutes to complete. I'm going to sound really British when I say this, but Harry Fletcher Wood, my colleague who designed them, said that he wanted a teacher to be able to put the kettle on, make a cup of tea and drink the cup of tea and have done at least 2 modules in that time. So that's the aim in their design.
I don't think, okay. I'd love to be able to pull something like that out. That was amazing. That's great. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Sean, I know you had to take off for an emergency. We had a generator exploding in the middle of this as well. But we got to hear about something that is maybe the hardest part of coaching, which is figuring out what we're going to talk to them about, and then planning how we're going to talk about it and agree on something together in a way that isn't, that isn't intimidating, that it doesn't sort of rob them of their own agency in their thinking, but also is moving them forward step by step. So thank you guys so much for coming, and yeah, have a great holiday. And we will see you on January 14th, if that's okay. These are just free sessions we're putting out there for the American launch. So we just would love for you to come and come chat with us.
Thank you so much. This was really helpful.
Oh, fab. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, so nice to have you with us. Thanks for your contributions. Amazing.
Have a great holiday.
You too. Have a good Christmas. And if you're watching the recording of this session, then we would also just really love to know your thoughts. So like send Zach an email, share your reflection. Yeah, join in.